Hello again. I want to do yet another presentation here, kind of taking up where I left off, but with maybe a little bit of a side uh, trip or down a rabbit hole of sorts. But what I want to really talk about right now is the idea of consciousness, cell phones, and radio, and what do they have in common? Uh, and you might say, well, are you crazy? What do they have in common? And I think that the thing that they have in common is electronic waves. Uh, there are microwaves that aid in uh, us being able to use uh, all kinds of wireless devices. And there are radio waves that make it possible for us to listen to AM and FM radio as we drive in our car. I realize that Sirius XM and all of the other kinds of offerings that we have now make it less uh, reasonable to believe that we will actually be listening to AM or FM radio. But I'm kind of a sports nut, and traveling around here in Memphis, I listen to sports radio a lot. So I'm familiar with that. But what I want to uh, bring your attention to is this. Nikola Tesla was kind of a mad scientist in a lot of people's views, but he believed that the discovery of electromagnetic radiation, that he would be able to transport power, electrical power, through the air. And while he was never completely successful in doing that for a lot of reasons, one of which Edison kind of beat him out and developed a grid of wires that ended up costing us a lot of money, but it created a whole uh, industry and has put a lot of people to work. So that's kind of beside the point, not really what I want to talk about. But Marconi then also developed the ability to send radio waves. And so now it is pretty clear that the unified field is made up of waves. And of course, going back to Tesla, he would argue that the ether or the ether is a complete field of electromagnetic energy. And since we're able to make matter out of light, that's recently been done, then I think it's pretty clear that light being electromagnetic energy uh, makes it very plausible indeed that electromagnetic energy is within the unified field. And when, as I understand it, and I'm not a quantum physicist, but as I understand it, basically, during observations, the waves collapse into particles. And that is the source of the material world. That's the source of materialistic physics, that these waves collapse into matter. And so it's not that far out of the question that the concept of there being potential in this field, and that we or some other source creates from the potential within the field reality. So that's interesting. Now let's take a look at the brain. How does the brain function? The brain functions with neurons. But aside from that, the neurons are actually electro waves that are called brain waves. And likewise, the heart and the muscles and a lot of our anatomy is directly tied to electric energy. That's how we operate. We are, you might say, electric beings. And while we're biological and not chemical, it still is actually the same principle. Okay, so now let's take a look at Hermetic thought. And the Kabbalion was written in the 1900s or the early 1900s or the late 1800s, probably by William Walker Atkinson. So I'm not talking about an ancient writing when I refer to the Kabbalion, but in studying Hermetics and the Corpus Hermeticum, then it is obvious that Atkinson actually did put the salient principles of Corpus Hermeticum into the Kabbalion. And so one of the principles that is stated is as above, so below, and as below, so above. And this is also in the emerald tablets that are more ancient. And according to Tim Freak and Peter Gandy in their book, the Hermetica, the lost wisdom of the pharaohs, that actually these ideas were put on pyramids in Egypt 3,000 years before Christ, or in other words, 5,000 some years ago. So the concept of as above, so below, what is that concept? Well, you probably know it, but for any that don't, I will briefly explain it. As above, so below, and as below, so above merely states that in the spiritual world or the world of consciousness is kind of mirrored by the physical world, but that the physical world will also give us a clue into what the spiritual world's like. And so I'm basing this idea on the fact that we have been able to harness and use radio waves and microwaves in wireless types of applications across all of the technology that we have today. And so everybody's wireless. My computer right now is communicating with a modem that is wireless. You can charge your cell phone wirelessly by just getting it close to the electronic source. And so the concept of wireless, and we owe it all, really, to the experiments of Nikola Tesla. And so it has a foundation that goes back to the early beginnings of our use of electricity. And so here's my premise. And I think that this makes sense. Our brain deals with electrical impulses and electrical energy. And the thoughts that we have and any memories that we have and any experience that we have is somehow in some way, at least in part, generated in that brain with electronic waves in the brain. So then if you take a look at what quantum mechanics is saying about a unified field, and if that field is electromagnetic, and it seems like it is, And then if you take a look at Rupert Sheldrake's ideas in biology about morphic fields of resonance, and essentially and quickly what that is that uh, we as a species and other species communicate at that wave level. And so they've been able to do experiments that show that if you teach a trick to rats, for example, at Harvard, then it takes a certain amount of time for the rats to learn the trick. But what they found was that you could go to Europe, thousands of miles away, and begin to teach the trick to rats again and find out that they learned it much more quickly. And that is evidence in Rupert's mind and in his theories and in the studies that he's conducted of morphic fields of resonance. But also, to give you an example, if you've ever been out someplace and you were staring at an individual that had their back turned to you, they were in the public, but something caught your eye about that individual, so you were really taking some time and focusing on them and staring at them. And after a certain period of time, all at once, they'll turn around and look at you. And that's because Rupert says of fields of morphic resonance. So here's the bottom line idea in this. Where do thoughts come from? The ancient Greeks spoke of the muses. Where do ideas come into my head? Well, they may come from experience, and they may come from memory. But what about when I have an idea that pops into my head that isn't really based on experience at all? It's creative, and it's something new for me. And then that idea is there, it's in my head. And what I'm proposing is that that's the way that consciousness, or the mind at large, or the creative conscious source of which we are a part, communicates ideas with us. And I believe that all creativity, all things that are invented, are in part at least a result of this morphic field of resonance, or this field of consciousness. And the way that we pick it up is the same way that we would pick up wireless for the instruments that we've been able to turn into telephones or cell phones. Now, the words aren't actually transported. There's nothing but electronic signals, but those electronic signals convert at both ends. First, in the speaker, if I make a call and I speak into my cell phone and somebody picks it up and they listen to what I have to say, what's happening is that the receiver at both ends is acting similar to a brain, because I believe that our brains are transceivers of consciousness. And so that's really what a cell phone is. It is a wireless transceiver. You can send impulses of electricity out, and you can receive impulses of electricity. And the device, the brain, if you will, is the handheld device that is your phone. And while you don't know how that works in there, these electrical impulses are turned into the voice of whoever you're speaking with. And so I don't think that it's a far stretch to believe that we are connected to each other through these morphic fields, but we're also connected to what Aldous Huxley called the mind at large, and what Carl Jung called collective unconsciousness. And so it is important to understand that uh, we're kind of at a place where it makes sense. The preponderance of the evidence is that some of the communication, at least that we get, is not from us at all. It is either from the conscious creative source or other consciousness. And certainly, if you've thought about egregores or thought forms, this is precisely the way that they gain any kind of traction or materiality. Now, I think that I've covered enough for now. This is the food for thought that I want us to have, and that is that what is the link between consciousness, cell phones, and the radio? It's that they all operate in a field of electromagnetic energy. And that is the transmission vehicle. And while a cell phone is constructed, my cell phone here is constructed by uh, Apple. I have an iPhone. And somebody made this device so that it would pick up microwaves and offer communication across boundaries, distances. Now I realize that it goes from tower to tower to tower. So it's relayed several times if I'm in California and calling New York. But nevertheless, it's traveling at the speed of light through the atmosphere. But is it just in the atmosphere? No, it's through a medium where electromagnetic waves will travel. And the same thing's true of our consciousness. And that's the point that I want us to focus on and to think about. And we'll take it up in another place next time. And in the meantime, if you're enjoying these, like it, subscribe, and share it. And I will see you on the next one.